problematic phase of humanity. So what is hyperhumanism, and how does it relate to the latest technologies? It's not a Luddite approach. It's very much looking at how can we use technology from a human-centric perspective rather than a technocentric perspective. What I've been doing for around 5 years is really mapping out hyperhumanism. So the primary theory, looking at it from in terms of the techniques, the technologies, the art. We've just published a book in Jonathan's book here with on the whole question of art and the digital humanities. What is hyperhumanist art and what is transhumanist art? And we've got the philosophy of hyperhumanism, the architecture. What does city design look like when you actually design it from the perspective of the human rather than the perspective of the car, for instance? I'm also looking at the politics and the business of hyperhumanism. So since I last spoke about this subject here at EVA in 2020, obviously AI has massively transformed a lot of our lives already. I'm now a professor of media over at the University of East London, and a lot of students are just basically using ChatGPT to outsource their work. I explained to them, look, if you're going to just get a machine to do the work for you, why are you spending £9,000 a year to be here? What's the point? And obviously, when lecturers are receiving these obviously written AI essays, they're just feeling disrespected. So they use AI to actually mark those essays. And then all you've got is this battle between AI and nobody's actually there. There's nobody in the room. So this is the problem with the technology as it stands. So when the creative act is externalized to our machines, what will happen to our creativity? That's what I'm saying to all these students. You're a sovereign being. You are a channel. You have a lot of potential as long as you don't atrophy that muscle. So how can we make sure it's not outsourced, but it's augmented? How can we use these technologies as in a synthesis, in a relationship where you have an assistant? Now we have really powerful tools, but only if you work with them and don't become the slave to them. So our method is we're going to focus on the relationships and use concepts from hyperhumanism to reframe our relationships to these tools in the hope of inspiring new ways of being creative in the age of generative AI. So one of the big problems you may have heard about is model collapse. And model collapse, basically, you're going to have a little explanation here, but this idea that if we're training those models, the ChatGPT model, whatever the model it is that you're using, if it's all being trained on the whole internet, and then generative AI is now made, reportedly 30% of the internet is already generative AI, which means if you're training it on its synthetic data, you get model collapse because it doesn't work. It needs human creativity in order to flourish. I think that's a real case for hyperhumanism. So let's have a little listen to this. We've got some.
Just like how a healthy ecosystem needs biodiversity, AI needs...
Got that again. Turn it up a little bit more.
Just like how a healthy ecosystem needs biodiversity, AI needs diversity in its training data to be effective. Otherwise, you get model collapse. Model collapse is what happens when AI models are trained on synthetic, AI-generated content, as opposed to human-generated content, and degrade. Simply put, it's a feedback loop. As generative AI models create more and more content that gets shared on the internet, the next generation of AI models eventually train on that content instead of human-generated content. These new models will rely too heavily on patterns, overestimating probable events, and underestimating improbable events, which means these synthetically trained models will compound errors, misinterpret data, and give increasingly wrong and homogeneous outputs. This phenomenon has the potential to create data pollution on a large scale. Although generative AI enables more efficient text generation than ever seen before, model collapse implies that none of this data will be valuable to train the next generation of AI models.
There's lots of talk of ChatGPT getting more stupid. I think that there's a real danger that as we go forward, people will abandon AI because it's not reliable. Already, we're told that it's hallucinating. How much do we trust the average hippie or tripper? It's exactly what it is. So generative AI, as you know, is involved with a multimodality of outputs, whether it's languages, whether it's image generation, sound now we're seeing, and we're going to have an example from Filip later on in that. So Suno and Udio are the big sound generators. And again, I know a lot of musicians that would just out of principle not use these technologies. They don't want to press a button and have all their work done for them. What's the point of being an artist? So unless you're going to use it in a creative way, so for instance, some AI images use 300 prompts to make them. And that for me is a craft. So there is craft here, but it's a question of how we use it. And you know, it's a bit of a binary to say transhumanism versus hyperhumanism. If we look at the transhumanist agenda, it's very much looking at everything from an engineering perspective. You know, every problem has a solution, technology first, and the human is just a bug. It's just something that needs to be solved. Whereas the hyperhuman approach is not a problem to solve, it's an experience to be had. And I think, and I say it many times, we have won the jackpot to be human for a very short window of time. We're only here for 1,000 months. You know, let that sink in. 1,000 months is the average 83 lifespan, so it's a very short window of time. And we think we're immortal, we think we own things. You know, get with the program, we don't own anything, we don't even own our own bodies. So it's all for us, but none of it is ours. So let's use technology as a scaffolding to learn these new abilities and not become dependent on technology, but actually use technology to create these muscles or these new senses that we then develop ourselves. So if we look at the definition of human, in the Greek it's anthropos, which means to look up. And I think we've taken the humanity out of the human. In every dinner party around the land, we're seeing the same conversation. What is the human now? If we're giving away our creativity, if the AI becomes the poet or the musician, what is our role? You know, there was that great quote where it's like, I want the AI to do the washing up. And that gives me more time to do my creative work. Let's be very careful about what we're getting the AI to do and what we're training the AI on. Yeah. So I think the potential is hyper, but only if we invest our individual and collective mind. It's a collective project. And what I'm really talking about is hyperhumanism. Let's be more humane to ourselves, to other creatures, and let's understand how we are living in a nested ecology and we're very dependent on everything around us. Also, I think it's very important to understand that we're trying to build altered traits, lasting change, not just the usual gimmicky, chasing your own tail, reaching peak experiences. I think it's very much around this term time energy. Let's be aware that, you know, if we live for our retirement, you won't have the energy. You may have the money, but you won't have the energy to do anything with it. So let's not live for tomorrow. Let's live right now and be very responsible with the energy that we have, the short time we have it. And I think taking control of your mind is an act of rebellion at this time. You know, we are so caught up in this absurd narrative that we've become redundant as human beings. And I think that's a real problem. As Gerard Lanier says, it's not so much the technology that will drive us insane, it's the perception of the technology. We have to unlearn a lot of these things. We have to recognize a lot of these narratives as mind viruses. And I love this Instagram. If you look at Instagram, every second Instagram account is selling you some sort of snake oil. They're all healers suddenly, you know, and we have to heal from healing. You know, and that's a fantastic thing to, I think, understand that we're not here to constantly be happy. It's not realistic. We learn more from our mistakes, we learn more from our pain than we ever do from our pleasure and our success. So hyperhumanism is post-traumatic growth. And a revolution that is based on people exercising their creativity in the midst of devastation is one of the greatest contributions of humankind. So I believe truly a true measure of our success is a calm nervous system, and better narratives, better storytelling. And we don't know our limits. I mean, look at this guy, he's sitting at -40, just having a picnic in the Himalayas. You know, we don't understand what the human is. It's a living exercise, and we shouldn't be told our limits. We shouldn't be told if you do this, you'll be gone in 3 days or whatever. It's just not true.
Joseph Campbell has
slide,
that
can we turn the
quote
volume up?
that you will know what gods a culture worships by looking at its horizon. Like, what are the tallest structures on the horizon? So we obviously worship leisure, comfort, banks, corporations. We have no multi-generational structures on our horizon that has been made in our lifetime. Cathedral consciousness is a culture developing a set of stories that allows them to create a cathedral. The average cathedral took 300 years to create. Pyramids took cathedral consciousness to create. It was not done in one lifetime. The thing that I think is so mystifying, the type of story required from a culture to do this type of project is so foreign to us that we have to elicit the intervention of aliens. That's how wounded we are. That's how wounded our culture is at trying to understand like what it would take for a group of people to work on something for multiple generations. I think all of our psyches need, in order to fully flourish, we need to feel like we're contributing to a multi-generational public project that's for the good of all people.
So that's a fantastic definition of hyperhumanism. How do we make sure that we're looking to the 5 generations that are to come? Let's not get caught up in this cult of productivity, the cult of the individual. So it's about knowing the difference between those who stay to feed the soil and those who come to grab the fruit. As I mentioned, it's about this collective. It's about everyone contributing to the definition even of this term.
Humans are not built to thrive under a transactional framework because we don't think, feel, or grow linearly, and yet, most relationships are Newtonian in nature. They're usually built on the linear premise of, what can you do for me? This line of questioning is designed to protect us from various downside risks, and it's a valid protection, but they don't capture the infinite, upward potential of human connection, and that's a risk in and of itself. This is where quantum relationships come into play. Quantum relationships are those that accelerate us without always coddling our feelings. These are the relationships that illuminate, inspire, and challenge our perception of the world as we know it. And this is anything but comfortable because they point us to an alternative path by helping us rewrite our personal history. So if you're aiming for linear and safe results in your life, sure, terminate any connection that slightly inconveniences you. But if you want your mental emotional real estate to open to new possibilities, then instead of asking, what can you do for me, start asking, what do you see that I don't?
So I think life is a mystery to be lived, not a problem to be solved. I think we need to go from human doing to human being. How many of us switch off from this productivity mode and just sit inside our own consciousness and explore that rather than this constant need to be productive? I also understand death. Get literate with death. Learning to die before you die is the real skill here. And the degree to which you feel whole is the degree to which you are aware of your connection to every living being. And I love this Japanese term, yatori, the conscious act of slowing down to savor the world around us, the refusal to rush. And this term here, inscendence rather than transcendence, the impulse not to rise above the world, but to climb into it, to seek its core. I'm going to hand over to Filip, who's going to talk a little bit more about the technology.
So transhumanism is not just a philosophy that elites supposedly entertain themselves with, but these ideas actually have concrete implications how we develop technologies. And the transhuman fantasies are usually built on things that sound very scientific, but they are in fact very pseudoscientific. So for example, humans have always used technology as metaphors for internal processes, the world, and so on. But in transhumanism, the difference is that this sounds very much like legit science. So for example, you've heard about consciousness uploading, that consciousness is software and we can just upload ourselves into the cloud and so on. The simulation hypothesis that the universe is a computer that we might be able to hack someday. And then you see big tech people like Elon Musk talking openly about these things, and you really see how an effect this can have. But transhumanism and hyperhumanism have something in common. That is that the human being is not a fixed condition. And this is what differs hyperhumanism from earlier, humanism. So there is something inherently liminal about being human, and hyperhumanism is about exploring that. So let's talk about hyperhumanism and creativity. What hyperhuman creativity is all about is about avoiding the bypass that is so easy and so at hand for us today with generative AI, but rather like viewing the learning process and the creative process as something inherently valuable, as something you go through. And if you bypass it, you miss something very important. So for example, famous transhumanist Ray Kurzweil said, it takes forever to read the Brothers Karamazov. Why not just download it into your head? But he's sort of missing a big part of just the experience of reading Dostoevsky in this case. So to be creative with these tools is about facilitating this long-term mediation with these advanced tools, a man-machine collaboration, a close collaboration, and not handing over your agency to these tools. A lot of it is about creating context rather than content, because we have a lot of content, and that content needs to be curated somehow. So what actually generative AI opens up to is a new form of collage art, or a new remix culture, where it's not just about taking things from the past, but taking machine-generated content, giving it your own spin, and then we have something completely new and hopefully beautiful. So again, man-machine collaboration. And this is an example of, I'm a musician, so it's a piece I did called Not Human Yet, very inspired by mine and Carl's collaboration about hyperhumanism, whereas I seek to blend different cultural eras, so the Apollo mission, console cowboys in cyberspace, any Neuromancer fans in the audience perhaps. Basically, it's about the 20th century and the three big expeditions. One was into outer space with space technology, one was into inner space with neuroscience, psychedelics and so on, and one was into cyberspace. We went to the moon and pretty much never went back, but the expedition into inner space and cyberspace just continues. So I wanted to explore this intersection by controlling generative machine learning synthesizers with EEG data, and putting a bit of an acid Western spin on it, because that's what I'm into. So let's listen to a bit of this.
Can you tell us what your brain is doing here? Your brain is interacting?
Yeah, so I am controlling, okay, this sounds a bit weird. I'm playing notes mapped to different brain waves, so I don't have any control over what notes I'm playing, but rather the band power is deciding what notes I'm playing, and some brain waves are also modulating the effects on my guitar. So it's very unpredictable for me to play it, so it's a generative piece of music. But it's not random, and I do learn to play with it as I go along. And the piece is 40 minutes, so it's like plenty of time to do that.
Playing it's completely destroying the visual of the actual.
I wanted it to be glitchy, but you know, this is a bit too much. Okay, let's move on. There are two possible problems for generative AI that we talk about in our text. The first one is model collapse, as Carl mentioned. The problem that these systems need diverse data and novel data, quality data, in order to not just improve, but to maintain their quality. And this, of course, becomes a problem when more and more of the internet is being generated by these models. It is, however, disputed how inevitable this problem actually is. It was proposed last year in this article here that we're quoting, and so that is the debate right now, how inevitable this is. But it is clear that these systems are are becoming worse by only using synthetic data. So a possible solution, the technocentric approach, is of course figure out a technical solution to this problem by perhaps filtering out synthetic data in some way, which will be harder as these systems gets better, or coming up with some new form of training method. And the history of machine learning teaches us that this can take a few months or it can take decades, as some issues in machine learning have been theoretically solved for decades, but it has taken a very long time to, for example, have GPUs that can run these things or have enough data and so on. So let's see how this plays out. It's quite unclear at the moment. But the hyperhuman approach is, of course, to explore these systems and work with them and treat them as a craft rather than a means to bypass the creative process and really get intimate with them. And, you know, to, continue to create authentic data, that is to say, continue creating art, business as usual, quality art, so we can train these systems on new data. And the second problem is more of a social issue. It's content saturation, that if it's too easy to create content, then the internet will be flooded with low quality art, and it will ultimately make the internet a boring place to be. And this is Carl's phrase here, we're creating cookie cutter content that is costing the earth. And what we're pointing to there is that it takes a lot of power to run these systems. To generate a Midjourney image takes as much electricity as charging your phone. And you generate 4 at a time. So the possible solution, of course, one is to embrace offline life, to go offline and create art there. And there are ways to do this. And for example, the burner movement, maybe you've heard about Burning Man. That's a global thing now with people organizing big art meetups and parties online, then moving into physical, and those are entirely unique events. Context engineering, it's more about the curation as an art form rather than creating, I got into that earlier with new remix culture. And what I really want to emphasize is that this situation really calls for genuine human creativity and care, especially care, to actually have someone who cares about an artifact they make. That's the entire difference. And I'll stop there. Let's see.
Right, no, we've got one more slide to conclude. So Nick Cave, you may have seen, somebody actually wrote to Nick and said that they'd used him to make a new Nick Cave song without him there, and he was not pleased. And he wrote a brilliant piece around this. So this is one slight quote from that. This is what humble humans can offer. AI can only mimic the transcendental journey of the artist that forever grapples with his or her own shortcomings. This is where human genius resides, deeply embedded within, yet reaching beyond those limitations. So to conclude, as I mentioned, fear is the mind killer. So let's keep this all in perspective. I think we've already had the whole internet at our fingertips, all of human culture, human knowledge at our fingertips for some time. We haven't all become geniuses as a result of that. So I think it's all about how we use the technology. And I think we should approach these technologies with enthusiasm, with a real sense of like, we need to learn them. We need to actually be aware of what they can do rather than run away from them. And we need to create these hyperhuman literacies that enable us to look at the technology from a human perspective. And as I've already mentioned, we're mapping out these technologies and techniques. And as I mentioned yesterday, how do we have this visceral felt experience of living inside a nested ecology? Because that will then dictate how we're using our technologies. I smashed my phone screen a number of years ago, but I don't get a new phone immediately or even replace the screen. I just plug a mouse into my phone, and now I use a trackball with my phone, and it's like I've separated my hand from my screen, I've got rid of my RSI. So it's a hyperhuman approach to the technology, which means I get to keep my phone for longer, and this planned obsolescence can be booted out of the window. So we're building an Institute for Hyperhumanism. If you're interested in joining, or if you're interested in contributing from your perspectives to the definition of hyperhumanism, please email me here at carlhaydensmith@gmail.com. And just to finish, Filip has created for us an extraordinary piece of country music.
In a smoky London conference back in 2024, they spoke of a new tomorrow, not like the days of yore. With machines getting smarter, humans getting grand, they talked of hyperhumanism, power in our hands. From Nashville to New York City, to the hills of Idaho, people started wondering where this crazy world would go. Will we become more human or just cogs in a machine? At the EVA conference, they say the future's keen. Oh, the rise of hyper...
All right, that's